acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas of the Scugog Island First Nations, the Mississaugas peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgian Island First Nations. We'll then go to Canada.
Épopée
des plus brillantes exploits.
God keep our land.
Loyal sings free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard
That's terrific. It's a little different every time. It's really nice. Do we have could someone approve the adoption of our agenda? Could we have some trustee move that? Trustee Morton? And could we have a seconder? Say Trustee Noble. All in favor? We'll then move to, could I have somebody approve the minutes, the 3 sets of minutes we have there underneath the agenda items?
I'll move that, Chris.
Thank you.
I'll move that.
Okay, Michael, Patrice, all in favor? And no community presentations this evening. Ministry memorandums update. Director Marsh, I'll turn that over to you.
Thank you, through you, Chair Brainy. There have been a number of ministry memos, but I have been updating the board through the distance learning updates regularly at the public meetings. So I'll just note that we're anticipating more memos this week with the public announcement today that schools will remain closed until the end of June, and that distance learning will continue, as well as some enhanced summer learning programs. So once we receive those memos, we'll certainly be providing you with that information. I also want to flag that we have not yet received any further information as far as the release of the GSNs from the Ministry of Education. And so, of course, that has implications for education finance and setting the budget for next year. So we will keep you posted as far as when we do hear that. And wanted to take advantage of having the mic to also highlight that on May 28th, we are hosting a Parents as Partners conference virtually, and want to thank our PIC for organizing that, as well as staff, and looking forward to the opportunity to connect with parents that evening at the conference. So there's more information on the website, and it starts at 7 p.m. So just do a quick promotion of that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Acting Director Marsh. We will have go into no public question period questions this evening, we'll go right into presentations. And our first one, the culturally responsive and relevant pedagogy implementation of support for distance learning update. Superintendent Hamid and Lazarus.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Brainy. The report can be found on page 22 of your package. The purpose of this report is to provide trustees with information on the continued implementation of the DDSB culturally responsive and relevant CRRP system strategy that was launched in September with the toolkit and website. As we continue to support the goals of our equity strategic plan, we are thrilled to be able to update trustees on not only the CRRP strategy, how this work was foundational to the creation of our distance learning environments, but also to highlight the work of the senior team as a collective. You will find examples of all the system priorities thread through this presentation, and that is not by accident. It speaks to the integrated nature of this dynamic team. Please join me in welcoming Camille Ali, Equity Facilitator, and Meryl Matthews, Equity Officer, who will take us through this important work.
Good evening, trustees and senior team. My name is Camille Ali, and I am the Equity and Inclusive Education Facilitator, and I'll be presenting this evening alongside my partner in this work, Mr. Meryl Matthews, the Education Officer for Equity and Inclusive Education. The Durham District School Board is changing. Our census data and school-based data confirm and continue to inform and support our move towards culturally responsive and relevant pedagogy. Simultaneously, we are cognizant of our legal responsibilities to the Ontario Human Rights Code, which defines culture as the norms, values, practices, patterns of communication, language, laws, customs, and meanings shared by a group of people located in a given time and place. And here you can see how broad the term culture is when we refer to serving through a culturally relevant and responsive framework. What you see here are the 17 code grounds that we aim to protect as we serve. Meryl?
Well, good evening, everyone. Learn how to unmute. That's a part of my whole technical learning of this. In our last board presentation, we introduced you all to the impact of the curriculum, when tightly coupled with student voice, can have on the upholding of human rights and equity. We highlighted the work that was done by Jean Sauvé's students because it was a brilliant example of how culturally responsive and relevant practices takes gaps in opportunity and creates experiences. First was the experience that an 8th grade student was provided with the opportunity to do research for an open inquiry project as a part of the language curriculum. Second came the experience of presenting and facilitating a deeply personal and meaningful conversation with classmates and teachers. Third came the experience of presenting to the Board of Trustees, and fourth was the experience of doing an interview and appearing in the local newspaper. We cannot underestimate the power of creating equity of experience through the framework of culturally responsive and relevant practices, and how much it can mean to helping students feel seen and heard. During distance learning, the imperative for human rights and equity to be at the center of all considerations and to permeate each strategic priority has been made clear. This graphic comes from a document for school leaders called Principles to Inform Distance Learning Practice. The Equity Department has been working to connect families with technology from the beginning of what we now call distance learning, while also advancing and advocating for choice, voice, relationship, and connection to be central to the experiences that we are creating for students and families.
As we move ahead, we maintain a support model of knowledge building, coaching, mentoring, and job-embedded practice, working with school teams on areas that they define as a gap in opportunity for staff or students or both. We are partnering with them to find viable solutions. The following slides provide some examples for how we are activating our support model.
So knowledge building. This is our excitement in our work as a department, where every school leader was provided with this distance learning support tool, which builds on the work of inclusive student services and well-being. And embedded in this tool are articles, videos, and guiding questions to support leaders during this time and where they find their entry points in their work of being responsive to their communities and with their staff.
The CRP Google Classroom is an additional tool currently serving approximately 500 users, and over 100 resources have been shared that center around human rights, equity, and culturally responsive and relevant pedagogy.
And as a part of our coaching and mentoring support, we've been invited into virtual partnerships with school teams to think through equity issues such as engagement, such as assessment and content. And as schools settle into this new reality, we anticipate and welcome even more partnerships as a department.
To deeply support schools, the Equity Department recognizes the imperative to work in partnership with departments outside of our own. For example, Inclusive Student Services has offered a model of tiered support to school leaders when thinking through engagement. Working with their model, we work with schools to try to understand what engagement looks like for them, trying to determine what proactive steps would look like. We can help guide the conversation around engagement with questions such as, who are the families that we have failed to engage thus far? And how will we ensure that something new and different happens in this context? Who are the vulnerable students in our care? And how will our new model of schooling remove barriers and create more educational opportunities and experiences for them? And how will we create a sense of belonging and human connection for each child in a time of distance learning? Finally, we leave you tonight with one example of how the Equity and Inclusive Education team is working with others to support distance learning through the co-creation of a resource and webinars that will help educators work towards building distance learning communities. So we have a little video. We'll just play a part of it for you, and we welcome you to view the entire video. A link will be sent to you at the end of the board meeting this evening. My apologies.
Ani Bojo, Jennifer Henderson, Indigenous Cause, Oshawa Donjaba, Anishinaabe Kwe, Minwa Jaganashi Kwe, Minwa Geshe, Minwa Kinamage, and Dao. And together with a really amazing team of people and Unlearn, we've put together a really beautiful resource for educators that focuses on mattering and belonging and student voice.
Our world has been turned upside down. What are we learning from this? What do we need to unlearn? How do we move forward? Now more than ever, community and a sense of belonging is what's needed. We need you, now more than ever, to support families and students through this challenging time.
And now that we are in this situation, trying to reach hearts and minds through the computer screen or the telephone, it poses a significant challenge. We're just happy to be able to offer one more tool that will help you to invite conversations that are lying within your students right now.
That is our report. Trustees, the report is respectfully provided for trustee information, and we are happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you. Is there any questions or comments from trustees at this point in time? Seeing none, thank you very much for your presentation.
I'm sorry, I can't find the hand button because that's what's happening tonight.
No, yeah, no problem. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you for that, largely because I think what happens often when we're in crises is that equity gets put on the back burner and it becomes less important, and it's increasingly important, as we know, not less so. And so it's heartening to see that work continue, and I know that I appreciate it, and I'm sure that every trustee at this table appreciates it just as much. Thank you for that. Thank you for making it an ongoing priority.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from trustees?
Yes.
Paul, is your hand up, or I see like a yes there? I don't know if that's something that you're saying that you want to speak, or are you okay, Paul?
No, I'm okay. Maybe
Okay.
I should just touch the hand again.
No problem. Perfect. So we have Darlene then, and I saw your hand there. So Darlene, go ahead.
Thank you. And just similar to Nikki's comments, that it is so important and that it's iterative, that you're checking in and you're constantly going back and seeing who you're engaging, who we're not engaging, and making the effort to adjust and I think that's so important, and I really personally appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. We'll then move on to our report from committee holding camera. I'll turn it over to Trustee Lundquist.
Nikki, you're on mute, Nikki. Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. I'm having all kinds of technical problems today, most of which are my own doing. So I appreciate that.
You were quite animated in your conversation. I knew we wanted to hear it. So
I'm going to be a disappointment now because I'm doing a report of the committee of the whole, and there's not a lot to get your teeth into. So the report of the committee of the whole is found. Chris, can you give me the pages because I have them mixed up, please, in the agenda?
I have them, let's see here. I have to go back into another screen. I don't have them.
Okay, that's okay. So it's in the agenda. The board approved the actions of the committee of the whole in camera and discussed the security and property of the board, personnel issues. And that is my report.
Thank you. Director Marsh, is there any of the superintendents that have to report on anything, or?
I don't think any further detail is required, but Acting Associate Director Markovsky, would you like to add to that?
Sure. This evening, 2 reports came forward to trustees. We're in the first, the summary of the successful candidates for the elementary and secondary vice principals and principals pool list from the spring 2020 promotion process were highlighted. And in the second, trustees were informed of Administrative Council's deliberation of the transfer of administrators in preparation for the 2020-2021 school year. A summary of the successful candidates and transfers will also be captured in communication memos that will go out to the system tomorrow. Thank you, and that's my report on my end.
Thank you. Could we have somebody move that report? So Trustee Crawford and Trustee Thatcher can second it. All in favor? Perfect, thank you. We'll then move on to good news from the system. Acting Director Marsh.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Brainy. Very happy to introduce the video for this month, again, focusing on some of the connections we're creating through distance learning and narrated by students. So I'll just wait for it to come up on the screen. Thank you.
Good evening, trustees. On behalf of the students and staff of the DDSB, we are happy to bring you good news from across the system. Jeanette Walton, DDSB's Community Connect Experiential Learning Facilitator, and her Hamilton and Wentworth District School Board counterpart, recently created a one-stop shop for graduating students to access virtual tours of colleges, universities, and apprenticeship programs for campuses in Ontario.
Carruthers Creek Public School teacher Julia Mattis and her son Matthew, a Sinclair Secondary School alumnus, are helping frontline workers. Julia and Matthew are using 3D printers to create face shields. The DDSB has loaned 12 3D printers to support this initiative.
Every year, students and staff at Seneca Trail Public School raise money and donate to the Lake Ridge Health Cancer Center. To date, over $2,600 has been donated. This tradition started after the school community lost two amazing teachers, Lisa Dustrom and Kim Clausen, to cancer.
The French as a Second Language Review website was launched in April. Parents, guardians, students, staff, and community members are now able to get information about the upcoming review and stay updated on how they can share their opinions.
The DDSB and Chartwells teamed up to loan 75 plastic trays, 4 trolleys, and 2 heat seal bags to Viva retirement communities in Pickering. The loan will help Viva staff deliver meals to residents' rooms while their dining room is closed due to COVID-19 restrictions.
The DDSB and school communities raised awareness for Children's Mental Health Week from May 4th to May 8th by posting photos on social media, and student senators recorded themed videos for each day of the week that were shared online.
A 13-year-old Reese Chong of Robert Munch Public School decided to do what he could to help stop the spread of COVID-19 virus for younger students. Reese, with the help of his dad, created an animated video to help kids understand how the virus spreads. His short film featured zombies who touch surfaces, leaving behind COVID-19.
Schools across the district are keeping students engaged and involved with various initiatives, including virtual spirit days, where staff and students wear school attire and show it off online. Students and staff are sharing inspirational messages to maintain their connections and continue their learning.
The Poverty Strategy and Facility Services Departments teamed up with Student Nutrition Ontario Central East to donate food to Durham families. Non-perishable food items normally used for breakfast and snack programs were gathered from 31 DDSB schools and delivered to local food banks. Over $27,000 in grocery gift cards has been mailed to Durham families in need.
On behalf of the system, thank you, trustees. This is our report. The dates of significance, as you can see, take us up to the end of June 2020.
Thank you to Eamon and James from Pickering High School for reading this month's good news.
Thank you, Acting Director Marsh. We'll then move on to recommended actions. So report of standing committee meeting of May the 4th, 2020. Trustee Lundquist.
So you're gonna have to bear with me. I've had some trouble with paper tonight and everything.
Oh yeah,
else.
no problem. Don't worry.
I have many papers, but I don't seem to have May the 4th. So I'm sorry, you're gonna have to bear with me while I pull it up.
It's just pages 26 to 29. That's in the report. We just need someone to move that, and I would take it you'd want to, and we just need someone to second that.
Yeah, I was delighted to move it. Thank you.
Trustee Forbes, can you second that?
Yes.
Great. All in favor? Perfect. Thank you. We then move on to the student dress policy. Superintendent Davis.
Thank you, Chair Brainy, and through you. The report can be found on pages 30 to 53 of your package. The purpose of this report is to provide the Board of Trustees with the proposed revisions to the policy student dress code. The policy student dress code was scheduled to be revised during the year 2019-2020. And as a result, we engaged in a revision process that involved the creation of a student dress code committee. The committee included a total of 5 trustees, including our 3 student trustees. The committee also included principal, vice principal, and teacher voices. As part of the policy revision process, the committee engaged in correlating the feedback received from students, parents, and administrators. This was done through reaching out to our Special Education Advisory Committee, our Parent Involvement Committee, our Student Senate, as well as student focus groups. The policy is revised every 5 years to ensure consistency of practice at the school level and to ensure that we apply the principles of human rights code, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Please see the timelines and the feedback process in the critical path outlined in Appendix A on page 33. The proposed revisions to the policy student dress code are outlined in Appendix B on page 34. I've also included the procedures in Appendix C on page 40 for your information. Following board approval, each school in the DDSB is responsible for establishing and annually reviewing a dress code for students that promotes a safe and respectful environment for teaching and learning. The dress code shall comply with the Ontario Human Rights Code and the Ontario Education Act. The policy student dress code was brought forward as a notice of motion on April 6th, and I'm bringing it to you this evening for your approval. This concludes my report. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have at this time.
Thank you, Superintendent Davis. Any questions or comments from trustees? Trustee Forbes, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Brainy, and thank you, Superintendent Davis. And I know that there was a lot of work that went into the policy change. And I was just thinking back to when in our September meeting, we had kind of voted to have this subcommittee struck, and it included student voice from, in particular, our student trustees. I guess my concern is, and maybe it's not a concern, but we really wanted, what came out loud and clear from that meeting was that we wanted to stop policing female bodies through our dress code. And perhaps the student voice piece will enable that, but I just, as I read the policy, I guess I just, and I had mentioned this back in April when I was quite sick, so I wasn't too rational, but I guess I was expecting something a little different. And I just would like to have a consensus or a feeling from the board, and in particular, our student trustees. And I know Trustee West thought it was great. So I'm certainly not going to diverge from that opinion. But I guess from the idea that we wanted to stop policing women's bodies to the policy we have now, do we feel that this is, going to do it? And I like, though, that the student voice is in there, and maybe that's the piece that we've been missing, and that'll address the concerns that we have from our female students in particular on the dress code.
Thank you. I have Trustee Barnes and Trustee Crawford.
Thank you. I thank you for the work and effort that's gone into this. I thank you guys for doing that. I do have some concerns with the dress code policy. The way it is set is great because each school is going to sort of define their own dress code. I am worried that we're going to have some varying discrepancy based on cultural norms, or depend on the areas that certain cultures might live in, and the schools that they attend, I think it will affect some of that. I know in Ajax, I've had a lot of great discussions about dress code, ranging from uniforms back. So the code does do that. For myself, and I know I have my own bias built in this, coming from a culture where you wore a uniform all the time. With the definitions in there in regards to where you may cleavage and hips, I'm trying to figure out hips. I'm looking at where my hips are and what I would be wearing for my hips to be exposed, and cleavage as to where that is for those two pieces. I was a little concerned about those two pieces in there. But I like the fact that it's built around the human rights and equity portion of it. And I just wanted to put that out there in regards to those two pieces. My concern of discrepancies based on cultural norms, schools that might have a high population of certain cultural norms. I know that there has to be a great consensus, but I'm just thinking that there might be some discrepancies in those pieces, and coming from, and I know my own bias in regards to just having to cover the nipples and the hips. That's my two concerns in that.
So then go on to Trustee Crawford, then Trustee West.
Well, my concerns are similar, but my bigger concerns is that this is a very large document with many, many changes, and we haven't really had much time to go over it. And it's going to end up being a trustee document as soon as we adopt it, as though we had put all of these words in there. And my concerns are the same. Originally, this policy was for the principal and the people in the area to develop a policy. We put words in here, and when this goes back to them, and I assume it's going to go back to them, they're going to be limited to what we are endorsing in there, which is about nipples and hips and buttocks. So I don't know where you go from there. And other cultures that might say, well, we're not really in favor of that much exposure. How much say are they going to have in it? So the least we should do, if we're not going to refer this to a committee for more work, then I think that we should strike that portion of it and put the other part back in that allows the community to have some input as to how the wording should be. It's such a drastic change from the original wording, which just simply said about decency, what the community assumes is decency. And then we've gone and struck all of that out of there, and we've got totally a new document. So if someone would move for this to be, to go to a committee for us to study and maybe make a report at the next standing, I would really support that. But if nothing else, those words describing hips, nipples, etc., should be struck from it, and let the community decide what the wording should be in there. Thank you.
Trustee West, Trustee Lundquist, and Trustee Noble.
Okay, if I ask a question, can I get a follow-up after? Is that okay? So first of all, I just wonder if Superintendent Davis can sort of address the community aspect of this and how the community voice and student voice has sort of played a role in developing this, and sort of giving an opportunity to address some of the concerns brought forward by the trustees thus far, and addressing how community voice has played into why those things are in there now. I'd appreciate that.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Brady. This process that we had gone through was a process where we had started with a committee, and our overlying key message and our overlying principle is human rights, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So that is where we started our thinking, and that is where we continued our thinking. So we started a process by which we looked at those pieces. We also involved in that process, our committee, which consisted of 5 trustees, it consisted of principals, vice principals. We also took the draft and thinking to our parent involvement committee and received parent voice in terms of that. We also went to our special education advisory committee and received community voice through that. And the biggest part of this process was that we took the thinking to our student senate, and we had our students give us their thinking and their voice in terms of what they believe the student dress code should consist of. So that was a huge part of the process. We also had focus groups of students who were in different areas in their careers in education, and students who were close to graduating, as well as younger students, to get their thinking on what needs to be in the student dress code and what guidelines. The student dress code policy procedure serves as a guideline for our schools so that we could have some voices of the students in terms of what they feel should be in there. That was a key part of the process that we had. Also, a part of it was to provide updates and to provide greater clarity with respect to definitions, what appropriate means, roles and responsibilities, what the role of the students are, what the roles of the teachers and the roles of the administrators are, and then to specifically apply the principles of human rights, equity, diversity. Wellness was a key part as well in terms of what we heard about the student voices. This is also connected to our code of conduct, and we talked about in our meetings and in our committee meetings what bias aware progressive discipline would look like, how this is about education and how this is about wellness. So we went through a thorough process by which we engaged the voices of the different stakeholders, especially the students who would be, this is a student dress code, so who would be actively involved in that.
You had another question, Tyler, you said?
Yeah, so to sort of summarize based on that, I think this represents a very key crossroads for this board in terms of how we want to support student voice. We can talk about student voice is great, we love to have student voice, but when it really comes down to it, it comes down to the fact is right now, we have an opportunity to say we have consulted with all of these groups over a full year. We've had a committee in process for a full year in order to develop this. Students have said what they believe, principals have said what they believe, the community has said what they believe. And then in that case, this dress code has gone to develop that, has developed based upon that. So I think this is a really key and pivotal time where we can say we can support what our community is saying or we cannot support what our community is saying. And I think that's really important to emphasize here. Additionally, I want to bring forward the fact of a key argument for a lot of the things on a lot of the points on page 42 under 5.6, which several trustees have referred to already, are the idea that if it's not hurting anyone, why do we have it in there? And that is something that we really need to be cognizant of. And I believe really strongly in this is if we have a policy, why is it in there? If it's not hurting anybody, we don't need to have a policy on it, in my opinion. And I feel very strongly about that. And that's why I believe more in the liberation of the dress code in terms of allowing more individual expression in that way. And that is the opinion I have been getting from students for my entire term, not only as a student trustee, but since I was in grade 9, grade 8, grade 7, coming up all the way, it has been the idea that don't restrict us, allow us to make the decisions as much as possible. And if people want to wear more clothes and people want to do that, they're more than welcome to, and they're not saying you have to dress a certain way. The whole idea here is that people are given a variety of opportunity to dress the way that they want to dress. And I'll end on that. And I really hope that the trustees consider that this is what the community and this is what the students have been saying for a long time. So I really hope that we're able to endorse this. Thank you.
So we have Trustee Noble, Crawford, Forbes, and Templeton.
Oh, I was in there too, Trustee Brady.
Yes, actually you were, but it went off for some reason or another, and you were. I think. Sorry, Nikki. It was yourself, then Ashley, Paul, Scott, and then Sally. We have.
Thank you. So I'm just going to say that sometimes the problem with representational democracy is it's not representational. So I get that some student voice is heard. That doesn't mean all student voice is heard in this. And I actually am struggling with this policy. And I'm not struggling with it for some of the reasons that have been expressed. I'm struggling with it because policies, dress code policies have really disproportionately and negatively impacted female students or female identified students and racialized students and gender diverse students and all of the students who would benefit from having a right to self-express, to still being respectful in their environment, but that whole piece of self-expression during your teen years is everything, especially for students already struggling. So I'm worried about what some of my fellow trustees have expressed in terms of cleavage and hips, because to me that invites arbitrariness. It invites exactly what you don't want, which is gaze on the female body to determine what is acceptable to somebody else and not to you. And so I actually feel like this policy probably should be a policy that is across the board. And I know that not everybody feels that way, but my sense of it is this: a policy is intended to create a set of norms and expectations, and the norm should no longer be that we are going to police the bodies of female and female identified people, because that is what these codes have done for the longest time. And that's true of policies around race as well. So with hats and things that are very specific and that have been identified in that way. And so to me, I appreciate that this is an attempt to find some balance in that, right? Some people are going to be uncomfortable. Well, change is uncomfortable sometimes. And my view is this actually doesn't go too far. That I don't think that suddenly we're going to have scandalous responses in schools. I think what this is going to be is an opportunity for students to self-express in a way that isn't about gender stereotype or racial stereotype or anything else, that this is really about an opportunity to be you in the environment that you're in. Thank you.
You were muted, Chris. I'm assuming I was next on the list anyways.
You are, Ashley. Sorry, I was. Thank you.
Thank you. I do want to share that I was one of the trustees that had the privilege of sitting on this committee, and everything we're discussing today was also things that we had discussed previously in the committee, and nothing came to us easy. There was lots of debate and conversation. I think what's important to remember the most, though, is that we are a board that values equity, and with equity means that we value all students, of course. And as mentioned as previously by two of my trustee colleagues, the dress codes do inherently sexualize women's bodies. And that was the point I had raised initially when I had first brought up a dress code related motion in September as reference. And I still struggle with this, being that I was a former student of this board and the dress code was similar to what it is now pre this change. I do recall struggling myself as a student with the dress code and expressing myself just on what my body is. And that's a concern that I'm hearing from students today as well when I go to school visits or when I've attended events, that a lot of students are struggling to truly express themselves because they are limited in different capacities. And I believe that if we're going to value student voice in the way that we continue to say we do, we should get input from our students and really value them and say, this is an opportunity for us to take what they're saying to us and implement it. And as mentioned before, policies can change. So if we try this policy and it doesn't work the way we thought it worked, there's no harm in saying, you know what, that was a good try. Let's try it again a different way. There's no harm in admitting that this wasn't the best idea. But right now, I think we have the opportunity to show our students that we do care about what they're saying, especially in this time right now where distant learning is occurring and we're in a different environment than any of us could have expected we were going to be in. I think now is a good time to pass this. And if you're looking for a mover, I see the speakers list, but if you're looking for a mover, I'd be happy to move this.
Okay. Thank you, Trustee Noble. We'll keep you down as a mover, and we'll go to Trustee Crawford. Then we have Mesere, Wang, Barrett, Barnes, and Forbes.
Well, I think we need to keep in mind that this proposal still is going to go back to the community the way that I understand it. It's just going to go back in a different form than it was before. And I'd like to read into the record the way that it reads now before we make the changes. And it says, the dress code established locally at the school by parents, guardians, staff, and students is the standard of dress for all students. The dress code shall include standards for appropriate dress. So we've gone from that. What I'm afraid of here is that we're taking that opportunity away from the community to participate. We're going to hand them a document that describes the nipples hip thing. So what is the community going to do with that? Which direction can they go in that? Are they going to have the right to reject that and insert their own? I'm all for the idea of making things more equal. I also made a suggestion before that if you're going to mention all of these policies, everything from the Human Rights Code to the Charter of Rights, then you need to indicate in there what part of that you're talking about, because they're large documents. But that's another thing. I think that if we could strike that part, that suggested part out of it and let the community make it, that would make this acceptable. As it is, I could not accept it. And if it's not going to go to a committee for more work by the trustees, then I couldn't accept it the way it is now.
Okay, Trustee Mesere, Wang, Barrett, Barnes, and Ford.
Thank you. I think, as we're having these conversations, it's important to keep in mind what the purpose of this actually is, right? Like, dress is the way that the way a student dresses is the way that they physically and materially interact with the education system and with the students around them. And a policy cannot in any way inhibit that. The only thing a policy can do is create an avenue for a student to safely express themselves. And our job isn't, our job is fundamentally to protect that self-expression and to protect all individuals. It's incumbent upon us to recognize where, in the past, things might be more cumbersome on one group of people than another group of people. And our job isn't to look at equality, it's to look at equity, to make sure that every individual is able to have that same ability to express themselves in a way that they feel comfortable with, because the way you feel coming into a school impacts the way you learn and the way you function. So it's important that we keep that in mind, and that, as was previously mentioned, we remain open to making changes as is necessary. If we see that there are changes with this, we should continue to keep an open mind and recognize that, this in and of itself is a change. And moving forward, we're probably going to have to continue to make more changes. And when we implement things like these, we shouldn't just think about we shouldn't just think about the present. We shouldn't think about what students need right now. We should think, 5 years from now, what protections will students need? And we should be forward thinking in that. And those are kind of my remarks regarding that.
Thank you, Trustee Wang, then Barrett, Barnes, and Forbes.
Arlene, you're muted. Sorry, Arlene, you're muted. You have to unmute. You're still muted. Up in the right-hand corner. There you go. I think you're good. Oh, can't hear you.
Maybe try unplugging your headphones and plugging them back in or something like that.
It looks like it might be.
Why don't we move on to Trustee Barrett, Barnes, and Forbes?
Yeah, John is suggesting she has to go back out and come back in again, Arlene. Yeah, so if you want to sign out and come back in. That's what John's suggesting. Okay, but thank you, Chair Brainy. I wanted to be able to weigh into this and understanding that a committee of 5 trustees and community members, et cetera, have worked diligently on this. And you know, I'm old. And so therefore, when I went to school in the 70s, the reality is that the dress code railed against, if you even know what they're called, bell bottoms. And so, I mean, I believe on what you are saying, in the sense that the dress is certainly an ability for an expression for students. And I think that's an important element, and is an important critical element that you bring forward. I also don't want dress to be a repression either. And I can appreciate Trustee Barnes to talk about uniforms, but I've also seen uniforms be an act of dress repression as well. Economic sanctions against students, etc. There's all sorts of elements, but that's up to a community to decide. But what we have is a community here of a committee, and especially on the students, and with Tyler's very passionate piece. There are things that I would never wear. I am what I am, and I think that this policy allows students to be able to express that. In fact, I know there's a lot of concern about page 42, 5.6. But if you look at that, there's actually more restrictions than there are permissions. If you look at the language within that, there's a lot more things that you cannot wear as opposed to what you can wear. So I think that I'm going to support this policy, strongly support the policy, for a couple reasons. One, I believe in what you're saying, Sally, that dress is an expression. Tyler, I think it's very, very important to be able to recognize and hear the student voice and not to be able to give it lip service. I recognize that as a community, that there will be multiple desires to express themselves through their children, through the community, through the dress piece. And I believe this policy gives them the opportunity to be able to ensure that indeed the cultural norms are represented in their school. And it's always the ability to choose. I don't want a student to be able to what you're saying, Ashley, about having to go through school on being able to feel discounted because you can't express yourself in what you want to be able to wear. I've listened strongly to the student voice. We have a committee recommendation. I recognize that it is difficult, but I'm certainly going to support it because I think the legacy that you leave, and I know Arlene is going to say some incredible things too. So I'll probably agree with everything you say too, Arlene, because I believe that it is about being able to recognize the voice of students. Why did we start this process? We started this process because there was change taking place in the Toronto District School Board, and recognizing when it came forward to our board that we too needed to be able to recognize the time is changing. It's not that long ago, I had to wear a white shirt and tie to work. And now if anybody wears a white shirt and tie, except for some consultants that we dealt with, the reality is life is changing, fashion's important, and I support the voice of the trustees that have been on the committee, and certainly fully support the legacy and the strong voice that the 3 student trustees have represented here.
I'll take your voice there, Trustee Barrett, as seconding Trustee Noble's motion then.
I would be glad to second Trustee Noble's motion.
Thank you. So we'll go to Trustee Barnes Morton, and then we'll go to Trustee Wang, and then we'll take this to a vote. Go ahead. Go ahead, Trustee Barnes.
Thank you. I was by no means diminishing the work of the committee, as I sat on the committee as well. My concern that I brought forward with this is having conversations as well with students in the Black community, that a lot of Black girls are highly sexualized. And what the conversations around some of that was the pressure that they feel to dress in a certain way because of the expected norms. So what I was looking at was some guidelines that would stop at some point where the students that might not want to be pressured into dressing a certain way would have something to fall back on. So that was my concern in regards to the two pieces that I brought up in regards to community and why I wanted to bring that concern forward. So I was also talking about the other part of the student voice that I had also heard in talking to students in regards to the dress code and where they wanted to go and what they wanted to be involved in, because the reality is there is teen pressure and there is student pressure. So that's the point that I was trying to bring forward. Thank you.
So Trustee Morton, then Wang, Trustee Crawford, Lundquist, and Edwards. So go ahead, Trustee Morton.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Brainy. I just want to say that I fully support this motion. I love the passion that our student trustees have exhibited. I respect the work of this committee, and you have my support. Thank you for your work.
Thank you, Trustee Morton. Trustee Wang, go ahead.
I think you're on mute.
Hello? Hi. Okay.
There you go.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, sorry for the technical issues. I'd just like to echo what my co-trustees have been saying. And I think we've discussed some functions of the dress code, but I think another one should really help, be helping students to feel empowered and feel that their individual choices are being respected. I know in the committee, we discussed that part of what the dress code should be doing is preparing students for the workforce. And that was more of the kind of traditional kind of foundation for why dress codes exist today. And I think, personally, I think part of any student's development is, their ability to reason and to make their own independent choices. I truly don't believe that any student will be exploiting this dress code to dress ridiculously. I think it should be able to help students feel that they belong in the spaces that we offer within our school. So thank you.
Thank you. Have Trustee Crawford, Lundquist, Edwards, and West.
Well, just the point that it's a question really that this is going back to the community for them to have input on. Is that correct?
Superintendent Davis, did you want to comment on that?
Through you, Chair Brainy, at this point, we have gone through that process. The purpose of the meeting today, bring it to the trustees, was for trustee approval so that we could move forward with the next steps in terms of sharing it with our schools.
Thank you. Trustee Lundquist.
Sorry, thank you. So I think it's fairly clear where I stand on this in support of the policy, but I do want to acknowledge someone who hasn't been acknowledged in our discussion, which was Sophie Eklund, who was a student from O'Neill who actually raised this in the fall of 2018. And I think it's important to acknowledge the people who have pushed forward progressive policy in terms of students and student voice. And she was absolutely instrumental in making this an issue before this board. And I think it's important that we acknowledge her in this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. Trustee Edwards and Trustee West, and we'll go to a vote. Go ahead, Donna.
I fully support this because of, we've heard the student voice and we've had a significant committee look at it. And it does have in the policy that it's up to the principal to review with the school community council, along with the data, the dress code, as well as that it be reviewed every 4 years too. So I think we've covered that. When it comes to community input, the community themselves will still have input into the dress code, the individuality of it. So where there is a huge concern from the community at the time, and they can have their input as well. So I think it's very flexible, and I fully support it.
Thank you. I'll give you the last word, Trustee West, and we'll go to a vote. Go ahead.
Continuing to echo my absolute support for this motion and the idea that we need to emphasize the voice of students and respect that as much as possible, and our community. And also, I just wanted to request if we could have a recorded vote on this, and include the student trustee votes when recording that.
We could do that. Yep. So the motion, and before we do that, I would also extend my feelings on this. Also, that when you have a committee of people that have worked hard on this for quite some time now, that I would also support this wholeheartedly. I think it's definitely a good way forward, and I commend everyone that has worked on this and put their time into this. Being said, we have Trustee Noble is moving the recommendation of the motion. We have Trustee Barrett second, and you want a recorded vote. So I'm trying to think how we can do this on. Probably the best thing to do would just go forward. So we have Trustee Lundquist, I see your hand up. Trustee Edwards, you have your hand up. Okay. Let's see here. Trustee Noble, your hand's up. Trustee West, your hand's up. Trustee Crawford, I can't see your hand at all because we can't see your screen. So are you, it's a recorded vote. Paul, are you in favor or opposed?
Opposed.
Okay. We have Trustee Barnes. Can you put your hand up, or yay or nay? Okay. Trustee Barnes, Trustee Barrett is in favor. Trustee Morton is in favor. Trustee Forbes is in favor. Trustee Wang. Well, actually, sorry about that. Trustee Templeton and Trustee Thatcher. Are you in favor? Trustee Thatcher, I can't see you on the screen. And I think we have everyone that carries, so.
I don't think you mentioned me, but I am in favor.
Excuse me, what was that?
I think we missed Trustee Sally Messeret.
And are you in favor, Trustee Mazareth?
Yes.
Okay, yes. Perfect.
Yes.
Good. All right. So that carries. So we then move on to, we're now going to, let's see here, the information item of distance learning. Director Marsh.
Thank you, through you, Chair Brainy. It's my pleasure on behalf of Admin Council to bring a public briefing to the board in terms of the impact of school closures, and the report can be found on pages 55 to 70 in your board package. I want to begin by identifying that the Ministry of Education did announce today that schools would remain closed for the duration of this school year, so until the end of June. We anticipate, as I've said previously, some memos coming out as far as providing further direction potentially during the month of June. So this will really capture what we've done in the last 2 weeks. And then once those memos come out, we'll update you as far as our activities in relation to the extended school closures. From the very beginning, we've identified that well-being and mental health were the key priorities and recognized that many families would be experiencing undue hardship and increased stressors during this period. And so I begin the report very intentionally by identifying that that continues to be our main focus, and that there is evidence that as school closures extend, that the stressors that families are experiencing as far as economic situations at home, concern around the actual pandemic and impact on their family lives is growing. And so we have seen an increase as far as the amount of referrals that we're responding to as a district. And really pleased that one of the first things we did as a district was to create a protocol as far as how to access assistance during this period. But I do want to flag that certainly we are seeing an increase. We will continue to respond as best as possible, involve community agencies as needed, and continue to message the importance of flexibility, and that this period is about making a connection and for the relationships to continue. Key piece of work that we are now ready to launch is the Identification Placement Review Committee meetings, the IPRC meetings. We had only had approximately 9% done prior to March break, and the big amount of time for those placement meetings does tend to be post-March break. We did pause them initially to ensure that we could move forward with our families in a way that was responsive to family voice and having the professionals that we require around the table. So very pleased. Inclusive Student Services, as well as the other members of the team, have worked diligently to be able to launch an electronic platform to engage families and family voice during the IPRC process. And so we're looking forward to engaging our families in that work moving forward. We have completed 2 thought exchanges in the previous 2 weeks since I've last updated you, one at elementary and one at secondary. The secondary one was a little bit earlier than the elementary, so we've had further opportunity to analyze the data that we've received from students. The turnout was 16%, so we have flagged for schools as we work through that data that it's important for them to continue to seek student voice in their classroom settings. 16% does not represent the majority of students. However, there is insight there that we can certainly learn from. We have collated that feedback. We've created a document for secondary educators to review some of the major themes that came out of the feedback for them to continue then to engage their students in considering how to best meet the student needs during distance learning. I think a theme from both elementary and secondary. We will do the same with elementary as well. It's just it was a slightly later survey, and so it will follow. But we anticipate by the end of this week being able to release a similar document to elementary educators. And at our next meeting, we'll certainly then provide you more detail as far as what has gone out. Elementary, the uptake of it was less. So I think there was approximately, I'm looking through my notes just to see, I think it was approximately 6 or 7% of families. So there were less families engaging in the participation than in secondary. Predominantly the families were in grades 4 to 6. Some of the major themes that evolved through both thought exchanges was the variance of life circumstances impacting engagement in the student learning. There was definitely an appreciation for two-way communication with teachers and flexible schedules. One of the things that emerged more at elementary than secondary was that the community families who did respond felt very differently about how distance learning should look. And so we had the highest rating as far as learning was about flexibility, and asking that families be able to determine their own schedule and engage when they were able to, but not to have live interactions. But Almost equal, but not quite as much, was the idea that they really wanted some live interactions with the teacher in a classroom setting. So that's a challenging situation for us as a district when there is such a force of wanting different things within our families. We're going to continue to remain committed to doing our best to respond to family needs, differentiating and doing our best to meet them where they are and moving forward, recognizing that distance learning does not replace regular classroom interactions and learning, but really looking to try to create those opportunities for some two-way communication as best as possible, whether it's live or otherwise. We will continue to review the processes. We know that needs are changing as school closures extend, and so we will need to continue to offer professional learning and provide assistance to do our very best in a collaborative fashion, understanding that our staff likewise have a number of variety of situations impacting them as far as what they were able to provide for students. I think that we will continue to work collaboratively with them, but we've already had, since April 15th, we've offered over 100 PD sessions with over 4,000 participants as far as educators wanting to understand how best to, or get ideas as far as how best to structure distance learning. We know that it's not perfect. It's not an ideal teaching and learning environment, but we will continue to try to meet our needs as the situation evolves. I want to also note that we've been receiving a lot of feedback around the collection of personal belongings. We are working on a plan and hope to be able to update you shortly in terms of being able to provide those personal belongings back to families that are in schools now that we know that there won't be an opportunity to return in June. There was also a memo in the last 2 weeks from the Ministry of Education in relation to voluntary deployment of staff. And so there is a framework being developed in terms of those staff who aren't required necessarily for work right now within the district, an opportunity for them to potentially be deployed to frontline services, essential workers, such as long-term care homes and hospitals. We are anticipating that most of our staff are highly engaged as far as work right now, but we will do our very best for those who are wishing to have a look at what that framework could look like, and you can expect more information on that following. Construction projects, it's good news that they are, once again, there's an opportunity for construction on our school sites to continue where construction was happening. And facility services has been in contact with our contractors. Of course, the important that physical distancing regulations are followed as far as the safety of the construction contractors, but very pleased to see that some progress will be occurring on our capital projects. So want to conclude by just thanking once again our community. We know that it is not an easy time. And our staff who really are working towards an evolution of distance learning as we remain in it longer. And also want to, again, reinforce the importance that the mental health and well-being, one of the research pieces that came out of SARS was that the long-term impact on it was actually around mental health and well-being versus any specific learning gap. And I think the longer that we're in this period, the more important it is that we continue to focus on that notion of it's going to be okay, and not to get preoccupied with due dates and schedules, but rather continue to be flexible, understanding families are in different places. So very happy to take any questions. The written report was much longer, so I've just tried to provide some highlights for you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Trustee Edwards and Trustee Lundquist have a question.
Thank you. And I do understand that staff have been very flexible in supporting their students' needs and around schedules, family schedules, which has been very, very important. I'm just looking at sort of the IPRC process, and I'm having difficulty where parents are going to have to make a decision around what is a traditional placement and what might not look like that in come September when it goes to that, as well as the students' needs might have significantly changed. So they might decide to do, say that, yes, a mainstream placement with this is fine. But then over the summer, things have changed, situations have changed. And they might say, no, my student is not going to suffice in a main class setting with just supports they need, and assessments would have to be done. But I'm just concerned, around the flexibility of placement settings now, where parents are making a decision at this point in time, and it could significantly change by come September. And what are we going to do to help that? And I know that we have limited flexibility when it comes to spots.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I'll ask Superintendent Macaulay to respond. Thank you.
Good evening, and through you, Chair Brainy. Trustee Edwards, thank you so much for that question. I think twofold. One is the team was very committed to ensuring parent and caregiver voice in the IPRC decisions. And so the team has re-emphasized the commitment to case conferences and all of the discussion that leads up prior to the IPRC, with the IPRC really being that decision point around strengths and needs. Again, we look at strengths as those gateways and the assets that we program for students' needs through. I think one of the strengths of our district is the thorough and comprehensive planning towards our special education programs that starts back in January. And so the team, again, across departments, and Superintendent Hamid spoke to the dynamic integration of the portfolios. I think this is another example of that, where we have facilities, programs, budget and finance all at the table. Starting in January, we look at an individual student level. We take a system approach from a 3 to 5 year perspective, but looking at individual students. And it's from those individual student pathways that we plan forward for the special education programs. In Durham, we emphasize least restrictive models of access. So really moving forward on those universal designs for learning within our regular class placements, robust programming for our kids, and then moving into the more intensive settings for those that need them. That's partially why we took the pause on IPRCs as well too. Between March, as Acting Director March mentioned, we wanted to get a robust platform so that our clinicians could be part of those face-to-face connections with families for these critical decisions, and then offer some variability on that. So we are planning forward using assessment data, both from the classrooms when we were in our buildings in learning, the clinical assessments available from our teams, from community teams, and planning forward. But with the support of the senior team, we've also embedded, thankfully this year, a little bit of flexibility into our model, where we carry forward a very, very nominal FTE into September in case we do see an anomaly in an area that we need to adjust to. So as a team, we've tried to take an integrated approach, a student-focused approach, again, with looking at the individual student, our cohorts, and then up to our system level. And then building in proactive and responsive within that. But again, with families and caregivers being essential in that. And as Acting Director Marsh said, we know that this is changing the circumstances for some of our students and our families. And so for our team, it's how do we respond to each student, no matter where they are in a placement, and our commitment up to the full 71,000 students as we scale that, because it's going to look and sound different for many students individually. But greatly appreciate your question and look forward to exploring it further at SEAC on Thursday night as well.
Thank you. Can I have a supplemental?
Go ahead.
It's just also that I'm just wondering, because there may be some parents that choose not to come back even in September. I'm just wondering if we have an option around the homeschooling or the home sort of option to sort of as a transition back into the mainstream. Like, is that being looked at as well, or is it as a possibility? I don't know.
Through you, Chair Brainy. Thank you, Trustee Edwards, for that question. That is an area that we're anticipating further information coming from the ministry, as far as we anticipate they're going to have, depending on how the pandemic is playing out over the summer months, what that reentry in September looks like. So we're trying to position ourselves to be thinking proactively, but also understanding that there may be actually some decisions that are made provincially that will determine it, some sort of blended approach potentially. So we will, as soon as we hear more direction, and they have flagged that we will be hearing something from them, we'll be sharing it with you.
Thank you. Trustee Lundquist and Trustee West.
Thank you. So I think I have 3 points I'd just like to make in no particular order of importance, truly. The first was, Donna covered it really actually quite well, but I did want to add that I've had concerns expressed by parents about parent voice in this process. And so I hope that we are being really conscientious about doubling back and double checking with parents, because there seems to be a bit of a gap there. And I think it's important that we're really conscientious about it, particularly in this time where parents are already struggling so much with a world that looks very vastly different from what they have been accustomed to.
You're referring to the IPRC process specifically?
I am, yeah, I specifically am. Thank you. The second thing that I wanted to observe is I'm really pleased to hear that we're going to work on a plan to have parents find a way to retrieve their children's belongings. That's increasingly been a concern that has been expressed to several trustees. So I think we would all be delighted to hear that there is some progress, recognizing, of course, that it's not the board that's impeding that it really is about a safety issue and has to be addressed either through the province and or the public health authority. So I understand it, but it would be a very welcome development from a trustee perspective and a parent perspective. And then finally, I actually really just wanted to express my support for the conscientiousness and the cautiousness with which we are addressing the potential redeployment of people who work for this board. It is, what is happening in long-term care facilities is deeply concerning. It should be something that we proceed with in a very cautious way, and that appears to be the case. And I just wanted to express some appreciation for the commitment to protect the safety of the people who work for the DDSB. I think it's really, it says a lot about the culture and in a positive way. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Trustee West.
So sort of circling back to what we were talking about in terms of engaging students and engaging families and all this, I just wanted to say the level of engagement that we've had so far has been absolutely amazing. It's amazing to see the results that we have and that we get when we engage student and community voice. And it really helps to see that we are succeeding and where we need to improve for students who are on the ground when we truly engage that student voice. I just want to challenge our board and staff to, when we go back and when things do return to normal, how can we continue to engage the student voice in the way that we are now? The results that we're seeing of it right now are amazing with these thought exchanges, and I want us to, as much as we can, keep that in mind so that we're always keeping that voice of students, so that we can continue to find areas to improve and continue to highlight the areas where we're doing very well.
Great. Thank you, Trustee West. Seeing no correspondence, other business, I believe Trustee Barnes, did you want to change your vote in the recorded vote on the dress code?
Yeah, I wanted to, because I don't disagree with the overall document. I just do have some reservations based on conversations that I've had. So I didn't want to vote against it, but I didn't want to put it as an to abstain from voting for that. I don't think it changes the approval rate anyways.
Duly noted. Thank you, Trustee Barnes. And could you move to adjourn, Trustee Barnes, the meeting?
Meeting adjourned.
And could we have Trustee Templeton second that? All in favor? Great. Then we'll go back into our in-camera session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Are you there, John?